As a modern producer, I really like the idea of outboard gear, like the ability to like twist knobs and make stuff sound different without using any computer plugins is really appealing, but it's always stupid expensive and super complicated to route. And even setups that are made to use a DAW with outboard gear, there always seems to be a little bit of a compromise until I started messing around with this solution that has been really fun. I've been binging a lot of Emily Harpist videos, and so I've created this setup with Ableton that allows me to use my guitar pedals very quickly, very easily, and it's honestly really ignited a lot of creativity in me because I've already had a lot of these pedals lying around, and now I can actually use them. So let me show you what it looks like. But before we jump into it, let me just plug the Discord real quick. It's recent. It's made for people who want to get better at developing their indie pop sound, but it's also for people who have the goal of releasing new music constantly. I'm currently doing a YouTube video / experiment where I'm releasing a single every single week. So I'm sharing a lot of my insights in that Discord. I'll also be giving stuff away like my Ozone mastering presets, video breakdowns of how I'm creating songs. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, go to the description and join the server. Now on to the rest of the video. All right, so I'm in Ableton, and as you can see, I have my pedals sort of lined up here. I have some other ones besides this one off screen that I'll show you. At the end of this video, I will show you guys how I have this routed with like my interface and stuff like this. But one of the reasons why I love this setup is I have this effects track that I can just sort of drag onto a track here, and this is the external audio units Ableton device. And as you can see, I have the audio to and audio from sort of set where I want them to be by default. So if you're doing this often, most DAWs will have some kind of plugin like this that you can just kind of set your inputs and outputs as a preset and then just drag and drop it whenever you need to use it. So let me show you some of the creative ways I've been able to use this setup, starting with bass. So the first thing that I would use this kind of pedal for is a way to sort of modify a bass DI. So here, let's just get a regular sort of clean bass sound. So back in the Warped Tour days, a lot of bassists would use something called the Sans amp, which was like a way to sort of blend between like a distorted amp and a clean amp sound on your bass. And so with this setup, we can kind of do something similar to that. So I've duplicated the DI, I'm gonna turn on the pedal. All right, so that's a pretty gritty bass sound. I've used a sort of tube screamer sound, made it really drivey, brought down a lot of the low end, made it really honky. I can also pick a different distortion. Actually, instead of this pedal, let's try a fuzz that I have. So here's a little fuzz face style distortion that I have. So right there, that's already like a very unique bass sound that I would normally not get. And dialing it in with your fingers is really cool. I honestly really like these multi-effects units just because it's really easy to sort of like go between a bunch of different styles of pedals, and you can kind of get your money's worth a lot more if you get one of these. So not necessarily this specific model, but I would maybe look at getting a multi-effects unit first. Another use for pedals that I really like as of late have been like effects throws for certain words on a vocal. So here we have this guy. Yeah. So let's just throw this guy on here. And that's one of the things I really love about these multi-effects pedals is there are so many effects that are like normally not usable as like guitar effects. But when you just kind of scroll through them and add them in this context, some stuff that you might think is like never usable is actually pretty unique sounding. So the way that I like to normally do this kind of automation is just decide what I want to get the ad lib and then add it to a new track that has that effect on it. Like that's a little bit harsh, but you can tell like it's already getting into like weird territory. So we could even do some stuff like a spring reverb. So for stuff like this, I might actually keep the original up here and have this be almost like the separate effects layer beneath it. Just already some really weird effects that I might not be able to grab if I was just going through like a generic like multi-effects plugin. So another problem that you run into with outboard gear is like committing to stuff. Like how do you have that sound but then keep it so that the next time you pull up this session, it's actually there? So what I tend to do is literally like just solo it, and then I have bounce in place on my master. So I'll just hit 9 on my keyboard. let it ride out, and then boom, we have that as like its own audio file that's actually like in our session. Yeah. And already right here, I can just see like having fun with like chopping up effects, like weird stuff like this. And it's not that I'm not able to do any of this in a DAW, it's just that for some reason, this just feels really fun. It feels very janky and weird. And I find myself getting sounds out of something like this that I wouldn't get if I was just using a random plugin. Regardless of how much better those plugins are, just to be clear, like I'm not saying plugins are bad, I use them all the time, but being able to actually like twist a knob and be like, oh, okay, I'm turning up the distortion or I'm turning up the feedback. It's a really fun experience. Another thing that I love using it on are percussion loops. So here we have this loop. So what I'm gonna do is run it through this pedal. We're gonna specifically go to our delays. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the looper here. I'm gonna drop this loop into the looper. So if I just kind of hit play, this looper is kind of playing the source over and over again, starting from the beginning. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn on just a regular delay and see if I can get some rhythmic variations out of this. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna hit 9 and I'm gonna just be recording my twiddling with this delay because there can be some really cool, like weird feedback stuff you can do. So now I have this giant sort of like sound design thing that I can go through and I can find like individual samples that I like here. Like that's a pretty cool, like almost like squishy percussion sound, or even just like this, like there's so much cool stuff here from a sound design perspective, and it was literally just like a few seconds of me just like twiddling knobs and coming up with stuff. So if I like went through all of this, there could be like a lot of potential for just a sample pack just in that little performance. And so imagine being able to do this with any percussion loop you are using in your track at that moment, because I find another problem that I run into is I want like weird sound design stuff or percussion, but it's normally hard to find stuff that's weird and interesting and adds that little bit of texture, but is also kind of in the same universe as the song that I'm already making. And so I find that this can be really cool because with this kind of setup, you have the ability to manipulate sounds that you already have. Another way I like to use pedals is, in a weird way, what they were designed to do, which is to act as a guitar effects pedal. So I have this DI here. So here, let me throw on an amp patch that I think sounds cool. All right, that's kind of cool. But what I can do now is take this pedal, throw it before the amp. And so I've just messed around a little bit with like a simple octave verb, and that took it from this to this. Which is just already such a cool ambient texture layer. Let's see if we can find another one. Oh, the particle verb on this is really nice. Like, come on, that's really cool. If I turn off. And we don't even need to necessarily do it with reverbs. We can do it with like the regular guitar pedal. Do some physical automation with your hand. I think another thing I like about this pedal is it's a really great way to have fun with like sound design for like individual drum hits. So here without it, we have this guy. just like a regular old snare sample. Let's mess around with, actually here, let me use a different distortion. This is the Hog distortion from Talon Electric. The things that are normally used to like get this thing to distort a guitar actually make it a pretty decent snare designer. One thing I do notice is that it brings up a lot of like the background noise of a sample, especially if it has like reverb baked into it. So before, after. And again, that's kind of a deeper snare sample, but if we wanted to do something like, let's take like a decap snap sample. It's like a way to instantly like lo-fi any sound. Like if we were to sample what we have with these two guys here right now. So here's the original samples. And then here's the pedal samples. Like those sound pretty cool, but if you like layer them underneath it without the sample, with. Like they can add like some meat and some mid-range girth underneath samples that you already have in your track, which again is like another way of like adding effects and outboard gear and unique sound design stuff to your track that you're not just going to be able to find in a sample pack. You know, with this, you have the ability to affect it with any drum sample or snare sample you have. The last thing that I use it for, I don't really know what to call it other than like mono processing. So here we have this really cool stereo synth, which is a patch that I made in Vital. And so what we're gonna do is we're going to take the pedal, throw it on a duplicate of that sound. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna see if we can make a sort of weird, unique texture that is mono and in the middle that can sort of complement the stereo version of this sound. So I've found sort of a decent flanger sound. So this sound is in mono. So let's see what happens if we blend that underneath our main. All right, when we take it out, putting it in. So here, let's just take something like a spring reverb. So when we blend that underneath the main one above it, there's this weird like middle effect that I don't really know how to describe it, because it's like it's something that's collapsed to mono and then turned into something stereo again. So you get this like weird ringing out in the middle that kind of holds on to like those like fundamentals, those resonant frequencies. And then when you turn it off, it feels like there's something missing. So cool. But I thought I would go really quickly over how to route something like this correctly, because while you can definitely plug cables into random connections and get sound to come through, if you're trying to get stuff to sound as clean as possible and get the best audio quality, there's a way to get this kind of setup to sound clean that will probably make your results a lot more usable. All right, so the signal chain starts with my interface that I have over here off camera. It is an Antelope Discrete 4, but really you just want an interface that has like external outputs. And the main thing you want to look for is a TRS output, which stands for tip ring sleeve. Essentially, you want a balanced output, which is important because we're going to take that balanced output and we're going to be running it to what is called a reamp box. All right, a reamp box is going to take this TRS balanced signal, which works really well with things like mixers and audio interfaces, and it's going to turn it into a TS unbalanced signal, which is what we're going to be using to run to our guitar pedals. There's normally a little bit of volume control here to make sure you're running your volume into your pedals correctly. All right, now that pedal's output is going to be sent back to a DI box, which is going to take our TS unbalanced signal, turn it back into a balanced signal so that it can go back to our interface as a balanced signal. And I've used TRS constantly here because that's the way that my connections are routed, but just keep in mind, I'm using TRS as like shorthand for balanced. Like on some level, an XLR cable, so your reamp box might actually have like an XLR output here. It doesn't matter as long as it's balanced. So this is the ideal setup. Now, something you guys might notice is that this is actually in mono right now. So if we wanted this to be stereo, we would want to double this signal. So that might require us having a second reamp box, and then also having a second DI box, and then a second input. So if you wanted to run it stereo, that's what you would need. Another thing to keep in mind is power. All right, best case scenario, we have an isolated power supply. So this would be something like the Voodoo Labs Pedal Power 2. I would stay away from anything like those weird wall wart adapters that are just multiple jacks connected to something, or honestly, even some of like the name brand stuff like Donner or MXR. Those aren't really isolated power supplies. I would recommend looking for a power supply that you can actually like plug directly into the wall with DC power without needing some kind of AC adapter. That's normally a sign that it's not isolated and it will create a lot of noise in this pedal system. But alternatively, you could just use pedals that use a battery. But for a lot of the stuff that I'm using pedals for, they require a power supply and there is no battery. So yeah, that's how I would ideally set something like this up. But yeah, guys, that's the video. I've been having a lot of fun with these, so hopefully this inspires you guys to either spend a lot of money on a bunch of pedals that you don't need right now, or if you already have a lot of these elements lying around, maybe you're a guitar player and you're not really using them for live shows anymore, you can actually get some use out of them. But yeah, that was just a fun little video. See you guys next week.